Derek Sanders had always been proud of his stable, orderly life. Married for 9 years to Lauren, a corporate manager at a marketing firm, he thought he understood everything about his world. They owned a cozy suburban home, complete with a porch swing and a garden Lauren loved tending. But things began to shift when Claire moved in next door. She was hard to miss, mid-30s, dark auburn hair, always in bright colors that made her stand out. From the beginning, Derek noticed that she had an odd habit of staring. At first, he brushed it off as small-town curiosity. People gossiped in neighborhoods like theirs. He even joked with Lauren about Claire being overly friendly, the kind of neighbor who'd pop in with cookies unannounced. But soon, Derek realized Claire's attention wasn't directed at him, it was on Lauren. He'd catch her glancing over the fence or walking past their house more often than seemed normal. Lauren laughed it off whenever Derek mentioned it, calling him paranoid. The dynamic changed completely one night when Claire rang their doorbell at 10 p.m. Lauren had gone out to see some old college friends, leaving Derek home alone. Claire stood on the porch, her face pale, her hands fidgeting nervously. "I need to talk to you," she said in a low voice, her eyes darting toward the street. Derek reluctantly let her in. "What's this about?" he asked, folding his arms. Claire hesitated before speaking, as if unsure of how to phrase what she was about to say. "It's about your wife," she finally blurted out. Derek's stomach tightened at the words. "She's in danger." Claire claimed that Lauren had been secretly meeting with an ex-lover, someone abusive, someone dangerous. "I overheard her talking to him," Claire said. "It sounded serious. I'm worried he might hurt her." Derek's first reaction was disbelief. Lauren had never mentioned anything about an ex, let alone someone abusive. He dismissed Claire's claims, thinking maybe she was delusional. "Thanks for the concern," he said, his tone clipped. "But I trust my wife." Claire nodded but left with a cryptic warning. "Sometimes the people closest to us have secrets. Just be careful." The conversation lingered in Derek's mind. When Lauren came home that night, he asked her outright, "Hey, do you know someone from your past who's been bothering you?" Lauren frowned, clearly caught off guard. "What? No. Why would you ask that?" "Claire said something strange," Derek explained, watching her closely for a reaction. "She seems to think you've been seeing someone dangerous." To his surprise, Lauren laughed. "You're listening to Claire? Seriously, Derek, I barely know the woman. She's obviously got issues. Maybe she's just lonely and making up stories for attention." That explanation should have put Derek at ease, but something felt off. He tried to shake the doubts, telling himself that Claire's words were just small-town paranoia. Yet, a seed of suspicion had been planted. Over the next few days, Derek couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in Lauren's behavior, how she was more guarded with her phone, how she avoided eye contact whenever he asked about her schedule. His mind raced with possibilities, and soon, he found himself doing something he never thought he'd resort to. He began watching Lauren closely, paying attention to every call she took and every errand she ran. At first, it was small things, whispered conversations and texts she'd quickly hide when he entered the room. Then came the night when Derek followed her. He parked a few blocks away as Lauren met someone near a deserted cafe. From a distance, he couldn't hear what was being said, but the interaction was tense. Lauren looked anxious, her eyes darting around nervously. The man she was meeting, a tall figure in a leather jacket, kept gesturing aggressively, leaning in too close for comfort. Derek's heart pounded in his chest. Who the hell was this guy? And why hadn't Lauren told him about any of this? When Lauren got home later, Derek didn't confront her right away. He needed more proof. He needed to understand what he was dealing with before he made accusations that might shatter their marriage. But one thing was clear, Claire's warning wasn't just idle gossip. Something was going on, and it was bigger than Derek had imagined. Derek couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the man Lauren had met at the cafe, the shadowy figure leaning too close, the way Lauren seemed nervous and jumpy. The image replayed over and over, like a scene from a suspense movie he couldn't turn off. By the time the sun rose, Derek had made up his mind. He needed answers. And if Lauren wasn't going to tell him the truth, he'd have to find it on his own. That morning, as she got ready for work, Derek pretended everything was normal. He kissed her on the cheek as usual, but inside, his mind was racing. After Lauren left, Derek grabbed his phone and scrolled through the call logs and messages from the night before. He didn't find anything unusual, at least, not on his phone. Lauren, however, had been glued to her phone more than ever lately. She'd gotten good at hiding it too, keeping conversations vague and deleting messages right after sending them. It was almost like she knew someone might be watching. He considered snooping on her phone but quickly discarded the idea. Lauren was tech-savvy, probably using encrypted apps to cover her tracks. That's when he decided on another approach. He would follow her again, this time more carefully, more strategically. Over the next few days, Derek started tracking Lauren's movements. He kept a journal of her daily routine, noting patterns and deviations. For the most part, everything seemed ordinary. She went to work, hit the gym, and occasionally grabbed drinks with her coworkers. But then there were the odd errands, quick, unexplained stops at places Derek had never known her to frequent. Sometimes she'd spend 20 minutes at a gas station across town, other times she'd park in random neighborhoods for no apparent reason. He needed more proof. That's when he remembered an old friend from college, a tech geek named Eddie. If anyone could help him spy without getting caught, it was Eddie. "Derek, man, you're really doing this?" Eddie sounded skeptical when Derek called him up. "I mean, I can help you, sure, but are you sure this isn't just paranoia? People have private lives, you know. You might not like what you find. Just set me up with a tracker," Derek insisted. "I need to know for sure. I'm not about to accuse my wife without evidence." Within 24 hours, Derek had what he needed: a discreet GPS tracker hidden under Lauren's car bumper and access to a tracking app on his phone. Every move Lauren made was now being silently recorded. At first, the data seemed mundane. Lauren's commute to work, her stops at the grocery store, all routine. But then, 3 days later, Derek noticed something strange. Lauren left work early without telling him. She drove across town to a park near an industrial area, parked by an old office building, and disappeared inside. Derek followed, keeping a safe distance. He parked his car a few streets away and approached on foot, hiding behind a line of trees. He spotted her near the building's entrance, speaking in hushed tones with another man. Derek's pulse quickened. This wasn't the same man from the cafe. This guy looked older, with a scruffy beard and a nervous demeanor. Derek strained to hear what they were saying, but all he caught were fragments. "Everything's under control. And you need to be careful." Before he could get closer, Lauren glanced around nervously and headed inside. Derek cursed under his breath. He wasn't about to risk blowing his cover by following her in. Instead, he circled the area, trying to find clues about the building. It didn't take long to realize it was mostly abandoned, save for a few businesses renting office space on the upper floors. What the hell was she doing here? That night, Derek tried to act normal when Lauren came home. She was quiet, distant, as if lost in her own world. He wanted to ask her where she'd been but bit his tongue. He couldn't afford to tip his hand just yet. "You okay?" he finally asked, watching her as she stared blankly at her plate during dinner. "Yeah," Lauren replied quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired from work." Derek nodded, pretending to believe her. But inside, he knew she was lying. The next morning, Derek got an unexpected visitor, Claire. She showed up at his doorstep, looking more anxious than ever. "We need to talk," she said, her voice urgent. Derek let her in, closing the door behind them. He noticed her hands were shaking slightly as she took a seat on the couch. "What's going on, Claire?" he asked cautiously. "You don't trust me, do you?" she said, meeting his gaze directly. "I know you probably think I'm some crazy neighbor making things up, but Derek, I swear I'm not lying. Lauren's in danger. I overheard her on a phone call the other night. She's being threatened by someone. I think she's meeting with him again soon. Derek's mind raced. If Claire was telling the truth, this whole situation was far more serious than he thought. But another part of him remained skeptical. Claire was too involved, too invested in his life and Lauren's. Was she really looking out for them, or was there another motive behind her concern? He decided to play along, nodding as though he believed her. Okay, he said. Tell me exactly what you heard. As Claire began recounting her story, Derek couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled deeper into a web of lies and manipulation. He didn't know who to trust anymore, his wife, his neighbor, or even himself. One thing was certain, whatever game was being played, it wasn't over yet. The tension between Derek and Lauren had grown into a quiet, suffocating force. She seemed to be going through the motions, work, errands, dinners, but Derek noticed her subtle changes. Her eyes would dart away whenever he spoke too directly. She was jumpier than usual, double-checking locks on windows and the front door, almost as if expecting someone, or something. The mask of calm she wore was slipping, and Derek wasn't sure how much longer either of them could keep up the charade. Meanwhile, Claire's story echoed in his mind. Lauren's in danger. It sounded like something from a soap opera, but Derek couldn't shake the thought. He wasn't ready to fully believe Claire, but after tailing Lauren and seeing that suspicious man at the cafe, the idea didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. Days passed, and Derek's obsession deepened. The tracker app on his phone buzzed one afternoon, while he was fixing a loose board on the porch. Lauren's car had stopped near an industrial park again, the same one from before. Derek didn't hesitate this time. He dropped the hammer, grabbed his keys, and followed the GPS route. When he arrived, he parked in a discreet spot near a line of parked trucks. Peering through the windshield, he spotted Lauren's car in the lot. She was inside the building again, probably meeting someone like before. This time Derek was prepared. He slipped out of his car, circling the structure until he found a side door propped open by a rock. Inside, the building was eerily quiet. Empty corridors stretched out ahead of him, lined with old office doors and flickering overhead lights. Derek moved carefully, his footsteps muffled by the thin carpet. He followed distant voices, strained to hear more. He's starting to suspect. Lauren's voice echoed faintly. Derek froze. She was close, just around the corner. He won't find out. Another voice replied. Derek recognized it instantly. It was Claire. His blood ran cold. Claire? Why was she here? He leaned around the corner to see the two women standing in a small conference room. Lauren looked agitated, pacing with her arms crossed, while Claire leaned casually against the desk, watching her with an unnervingly calm expression. I told you not to get involved, Lauren said, her voice sharp. You're going to make things worse. Oh, come on, Claire replied, her tone light. I'm helping you. You don't even know what he's capable of. I'm doing this to protect you, Lauren. Protect me? Lauren scoffed. You don't know Derek. He's stubborn, but he's not dangerous. You need to stop feeding him these lies. Lies. Derek's stomach twisted. He strained to listen as Claire stepped closer to Lauren, lowering her voice. You think I'm the one lying? Claire whispered. You really think he hasn't been keeping secrets from you? Trust me, Lauren, I've seen how these things end. I've been through it before. Men like him don't just ask questions, they take control. He's going to find out everything unless you let me handle this. Lauren shook her head, clearly torn. I can't do this anymore, Claire. It's too much. I should have told Derek the truth from the beginning. The truth? You mean about him? Claire's voice dropped to an almost conspiratorial tone. You think Derek would stay calm if he knew you were meeting your ex? The same ex who hurt you. He wouldn't understand. Hurt her? Derek felt like he'd been punched in the gut. An ex? An abusive one? He struggled to piece it all together. He wanted to believe that Lauren wasn't hiding something like this from him. But the puzzle pieces didn't fit. If Claire was manipulating the situation, why would Lauren seem so anxious? And why hadn't she denied Claire's claims outright? The sound of footsteps brought Derek out of his thoughts. He ducked back into a side hallway as Claire and Lauren left the room. He caught a glimpse of Claire whispering something to Lauren as they walked out the building's front entrance. Derek waited until their footsteps faded before emerging from his hiding spot. His mind raced as he replayed what he had just overheard. Claire had insinuated that Lauren was meeting an abusive ex in secret, but it was becoming clear there was more to this than Derek had ever imagined. Was Lauren trying to protect him, or herself? And why was Claire so involved in all of this? He stayed behind for a few minutes, wandering the halls. On a whim, he checked one of the rooms adjacent to the conference area. It looked abandoned, dusty furniture pushed against the walls. But something stood out, a set of empty coffee cups, the remnants of a recent meeting. On the table were printed schedules and notes, scribbled with Lauren's handwriting. Derek scanned the papers, his eyes catching a recurring name, Jason Pierce. Jason Pierce, he muttered under his breath. Was this the ex Claire had mentioned? He didn't recognize the name, but it was now seared into his mind as another clue in this unfolding mystery. By the time Derek left the building, Lauren's car was gone. He spent the drive home with his thoughts racing. One thing was clear, someone was lying, and he was caught in the middle of their game. The problem was figuring out who to believe, and how far they were willing to go to keep their secrets. Later that evening, Derek sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. Lauren was upstairs, taking a long bath. He stared at the steam rising from his cup, contemplating his next move. Should he confront her? Should he confront Claire? The line between truth and deception was blurring fast. And Derek knew that the deeper he dug, the more dangerous this would become. Derek barely slept that night. The name Jason Pierce kept repeating in his mind, each repetition hitting like a drumbeat. Was this man Lauren's ex? Was he really a threat? And why hadn't Lauren trusted Derek enough to tell him about any of this? These questions spiraled until dawn broke, the weak morning light filtering through the blinds. When Lauren left for work, Derek decided it was time to take matters into his own hands. He called Eddie again. "Hey, I need a favor," Derek said, his voice low. "Can you run a background check on someone? Name's Jason Pierce." "Whoa, man. Are you a detective now?" Eddie teased, though his tone held some concern. "You're getting into deep waters here." "Just do it," Derek snapped. "Please. I'll owe you one." Eddie sighed. "All right. Give me a few hours. I'll see what I can find." While waiting for Eddie's update, Derek headed to the park near the industrial area where Lauren had been meeting people. He couldn't shake the feeling that answers were buried there, waiting to be uncovered. The building itself was locked this time, with no sign of life inside. He wandered the grounds, looking for anything out of place. Eventually, he noticed security cameras mounted near one of the back entrances. A plan began to form in his mind. If he could access the security footage, maybe he could see exactly who Lauren had been meeting. Later that afternoon, Eddie called back. "Got some info on your guy," he said. "Jason Pierce, he's got a record. Assault charges from about 6 years ago, but the case didn't go to trial. Sounds messy. And get this, he lived in your city around the same time Lauren did before you two got married. Think this is the same guy?" Derek's blood ran cold. Assault. It lined up with what Claire had said about an abusive ex, but Derek still didn't know who to trust. Why would Lauren keep something like this a secret from him? "Yeah," Derek muttered. "It's probably him." "Be careful, Derek," Eddie warned. "People with violent pasts can be unpredictable." Derek thanked him and hung up. The puzzle pieces were coming together, but there were still gaps. If Jason was back in Lauren's life, why hadn't she come to Derek for help? Was she afraid he'd overreact? Or was Claire exaggerating the whole thing to stir up trouble? The more Derek thought about Claire, the more uneasy he felt. She had a way of inserting herself into situations, acting as though she was protecting Lauren. But something didn't add up. Why would Claire go to such lengths if she didn't have her own agenda? That evening, Derek found himself standing at Claire's front door. He wasn't entirely sure what he hoped to gain from this, but he needed answers. Claire answered quickly, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Derek," she greeted. "Didn't expect to see you here. Can we talk?" Derek asked, his tone flat. "I've got some questions." "Of course." She stepped aside, letting him in. The house was warm, filled with the smell of lavender. Claire gestured for him to sit on the couch, but Derek remained standing. "I need to know the truth," he said. "All of it. You keep saying Lauren's in danger, but you're also keeping things from me. Who exactly is Jason Pierce?" Claire's face tightened for a moment before she sighed. "Jason is someone Lauren was involved with a long time ago. He wasn't good to her. Controlling. Violent. I overheard her talking about him a few weeks ago and I got scared for her." "Why didn't she tell me?" Derek demanded. "I'm her husband. Sometimes people keep things from the ones they love to protect them," Claire replied softly. "Maybe she didn't want you to get involved. Maybe she was afraid you'd do something reckless." Derek narrowed his eyes. "And what about you, Claire? Why are you so invested in this? What aren't you telling me?" For a moment, Claire's mask slipped. A flash of something, guilt? Pain, flickered across her face. But it was gone just as quickly. "I've seen people go through things like this," she said quietly. "Let's just say I know how it feels to be trapped by someone dangerous. I don't want that for Lauren." Derek didn't fully buy her explanation, but he couldn't deny that her words hit a nerve. Maybe Claire had been through something similar. Maybe that was why she was overstepping boundaries. Still, there was something off about the way she carried herself, too controlled, too rehearsed. "Thanks for the insight," Derek said finally, moving toward the door. "But if Lauren's in trouble, I'll handle it. She's my wife, Claire. Not yours." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken tension. Claire's expression hardened for a split second before softening again. "Of course," she said smoothly. "Just be careful, Derek. You might not like what you find." Derek left without another word, his mind buzzing with conflicting thoughts. He didn't trust Claire, but he couldn't dismiss what she'd said about Jason. His gut told him there were layers to this situation he still hadn't uncovered. Back at home, Lauren was already in bed, curled up under the blankets. Derek watched her for a long moment, wondering how much of what she told him over the years was true. He wanted to believe in her, to trust that their marriage hadn't been built on lies. But the weight of suspicion pressed down on him like a lead blanket. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd dig deeper. He'd find Jason Pierce and get the truth straight from the source. He wasn't going to be a pawn in someone else's game. Whatever secrets were being kept, Derek was determined to unravel them, no matter the cost. The next morning, Derek was on a mission. He left the house before Lauren woke up, his mind set on finding Jason Pierce. He had no real plan, but he figured someone with a criminal record might leave breadcrumbs if he looked in the right places. After a quick search on his phone, Derek tracked down an address linked to Jason in a nearby neighborhood. It wasn't a great part of town. Run-down houses, cracked sidewalks, and graffiti-covered walls surrounded him as he parked his car. For a moment, he wondered what he was walking into. Still, he couldn't turn back now. He knocked on the door of a small, dilapidated house. No answer. He tried again, harder this time. Finally, footsteps approached from the other side. The door opened a crack, revealing a disheveled man in his late 30s. His eyes were bloodshot, his face shadowed by days of unshaven stubble. "Who the hell are you?" the man demanded. "Jason Pierce," Derek said, his voice steady. It wasn't a question. Jason narrowed his eyes. "Yeah. What's it to you?" "I'm Derek Sanders. Lauren's husband." Derek watched Jason's reaction closely, searching for any signs of recognition or guilt. Instead, Jason's expression twisted into a smirk. "Oh, so you're that guy," Jason said, chuckling bitterly. "Figures. I heard you were sniffing around." "Heard from who?" Derek asked, his suspicion deepening. Jason shrugged. Word gets around. I want the truth, Derek said, stepping closer. Why are you meeting with my wife? What do you want from her? Jason crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. Look, man, I don't know what stories you've been fed, but Lauren came to me, not the other way around. I haven't seen her in years until recently. Why now? Derek pressed. What changed? Jason hesitated for a moment, then sighed. She needed some closure. Let's just say things didn't end well between us. I'm not proud of what happened, alright? But I've got my own life now. Whatever's going on with Lauren, it's got nothing to do with me anymore. Derek's jaw tightened. He didn't trust a word coming out of Jason's mouth, but something about his demeanor didn't scream threat. If anything, Jason seemed weary, as though he wanted to be left alone. Stay away from her, Derek warned. If I find out you've been causing her trouble. Relax, Jason cut him off, raising his hands in mock surrender. I'm not looking to stir up old drama. I've got my own problems, alright? You should be talking to Claire if you're worried about trouble. Derek froze. What does Claire have to do with this? Jason chuckled darkly. You don't know, do you? Wow. Figures. That woman's got her claws in deep. You think she's helping Lauren? Man, Claire's playing her own game. She's got a history of getting too close to people, if you catch my drift. Derek's stomach sank. Jason's words confirmed his worst fears. Claire wasn't just a concerned neighbor. She was orchestrating something behind the scenes, pulling strings Derek hadn't even realized existed. Watch your back, Jason added before slamming the door shut. Derek stood there for a moment, processing everything. Claire had always positioned herself as the protector, the one warning him about danger. But now it was becoming clear that she might be the real threat. When Derek returned home, Lauren was in the kitchen, sipping coffee. She looked up, surprised to see him back so early. Hey, she greeted cautiously. Where've you been? Just running errands, Derek lied, his mind racing. He couldn't confront her yet, not without more proof. What about you? Any plans today? Lauren hesitated before answering. Just the usual. Work stuff. Derek forced a smile. Sounds good. The rest of the day passed in a tense haze. Derek kept himself busy with housework, all the while keeping tabs on Lauren's movements. That evening, he noticed something strange. Claire hadn't shown up or called like she normally did. For someone who was usually in their business, her absence was suspicious. He decided to check the security cameras he'd installed around the house a few weeks earlier, just in case. What he found made his blood run cold. Earlier that afternoon, Claire had been outside their house. The footage showed her pacing near the side gate, glancing nervously toward the windows. At one point, she seemed to be arguing on the phone. The audio was too faint to hear, but her body language spoke volumes. She was angry, frustrated, as if her plans were unraveling. What the hell was she up to? Derek's mind flashed back to Jason's warning. Claire's got a history of getting too close to people. Was she trying to manipulate both him and Lauren? And if so, why? He needed to confront Claire again, but this time he'd be ready. He wasn't going to let her twist the truth anymore. That night, Derek lay in bed next to Lauren, his mind buzzing with questions and half-formed theories. He glanced over at her sleeping form, her face peaceful in the dim light. He wanted to reach out, to ask her for the truth, but the fear of what he might hear kept him silent. One thing was certain, Claire wasn't who she appeared to be. And Derek was determined to expose her lies before it was too late. As sleep finally overtook him, a single thought echoed in his mind. The web is tightening. And someone's going to get caught. The next morning, Derek was up before the sun. He couldn't shake the image of Claire pacing outside his house. Every instinct screamed that she was a threat, that there was more to her involvement than she had let on. Lauren was still asleep as he slipped out the door, his mind made up. He drove to Claire's house, determined to confront her once and for all. But when he arrived, something was off. The blinds were drawn, the driveway empty. Derek knocked on the door but got no response. "Claire," he called out, knocking harder. Still nothing. Frustrated, Derek glanced around the property and noticed a side window partially open. Against his better judgment, he walked around the house and peeked through it. Inside, he saw signs of hurried packing, half-filled suitcases and scattered clothes on the floor. "She's running," Derek thought. But why? His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Eddie. "Derek, I found something," Eddie said, his voice tense. "It's about Claire." "What is it?" Derek asked, his pulse quickening. "I dug into her background like you asked. Turns out, Claire's been involved in several incidents over the years. She's moved from town to town, always getting close to couples before things go south. Fights, breakups, even restraining orders in a couple of cases. She's got a pattern." Derek's grip tightened on the phone. "You're telling me she's done this before?" "Looks that way. And here's the kicker. One of her previous targets was married to a woman named Rachel. Sound familiar?" Derek's mind raced. Rachel. Lauren's college friend, the one who had suddenly cut off contact years ago. Lauren had mentioned her in passing once, saying they'd lost touch after Rachel went through a rough breakup. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Thanks, Eddie," Derek muttered, hanging up. Derek returned home, his thoughts a tangled mess. Claire was dangerous, that much was clear. But how deep did her manipulation run? Had she targeted Lauren from the start, or was this something else entirely? As he entered the house, Lauren was in the living room, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up, her brow furrowing in concern. "You look stressed," she said. "Is everything all right?" Derek hesitated. He wanted to tell her everything, to lay out all the pieces of the puzzle and demand the truth. But something held him back. What if confronting her pushed her further away? He needed to approach this carefully. "Yeah," he lied. "Just a long morning." Lauren didn't press further, but Derek could tell she sensed his tension. He sat beside her, their silence stretching uncomfortably. "I was thinking," Lauren began, breaking the quiet. "Maybe we should go out this weekend. Just the two of us. We haven't had much time together lately." Derek blinked, surprised. This was the first time in weeks that Lauren had suggested something like this. For a moment, he saw a glimpse of the woman he'd fallen in love with, the one who used to plan spontaneous trips and surprise him with date nights. "That sounds great," he said softly. "I'd like that." Lauren smiled, though there was still a trace of uncertainty in her eyes. It was as if she, too, was searching for answers neither of them were ready to give. Later that afternoon, Derek sat in his car, parked outside the industrial building once again. He needed to retrace Lauren's steps, to figure out what had really been happening here. This time, he wasn't going to leave without answers. He found the same side entrance propped open and slipped inside. The hallways were just as empty as before, the faint hum of fluorescent lights the only sound. He made his way to the conference room where he'd overheard Lauren and Claire talking days earlier. The room was empty now, but Derek noticed something new, a forgotten folder on the table. He opened it and scanned the documents inside. Most of it was mundane, business contracts, meeting schedules, but one page caught his attention. A name was highlighted at the top, Jason Pierce. His hands clenched the paper as he read further. The document appeared to be a police report, detailing an incident involving Jason years ago. According to the report, Claire had been a witness. She had given testimony against Jason during a domestic dispute, though the case was ultimately dropped due to lack of evidence. "Jesus," Derek muttered under his breath. Claire wasn't just meddling, she'd been involved in Lauren's past in ways he hadn't fully understood. Had she been trying to protect Lauren, or was she using their history to manipulate both of them? Before Derek could process further, he heard footsteps echoing in the corridor. He quickly stuffed the folder into his jacket and ducked behind a door. Peering through a crack, he saw Lauren walking down the hall, her face tense. She was on the phone. "I told you, I don't want to meet here anymore," she was saying, her voice hushed. It's too risky. Derek's getting suspicious. Derek's heart pounded in his chest. He strained to hear more. I'll figure something out, Lauren continued. Just stay away from him, all right? I don't want this to blow up. She hung up and glanced nervously around the hall before walking out the front entrance. Derek remained hidden until he was sure she was gone. The weight of everything he had learned pressed down on him. Lauren was still hiding something, but now he had a clearer picture of the tangled web around them. Jason, Claire, Lauren, they were all connected in ways he was only beginning to understand. And somewhere in that web, the truth was waiting to be unraveled. Derek's mind was racing as he drove home. The tension inside him coiled tighter with every mile. The folder hidden in his jacket felt heavier with each passing second. He couldn't shake Lauren's words from earlier. Derek's getting suspicious. Suspicious about what? How deep did her involvement with Jason and Claire run? By the time he pulled into the driveway, Derek's hands were trembling. He sat in the car for a moment, trying to steady himself. There was no turning back now. He had the evidence in front of him, and it was time for the truth to come out. Inside the house, Lauren was in the kitchen, humming softly as she stirred a pot of pasta sauce. The normalcy of the scene made Derek's stomach churn. How could she act so casual, so calm, while all of this was happening behind his back? Hey! Lauren greeted him with a smile. You're back early. Yeah, Derek said, his voice tight. He hung up his jacket and took a deep breath. We need to talk. Lauren froze for a moment, her hand hovering over the stove dial. Okay, about what? About Jason. And Claire. And everything you've been hiding from me. The color drained from Lauren's face. She set the spoon down slowly and turned to face him. What are you talking about? I went to the building. Derek continued, his tone sharp. I found the folder. I heard you on the phone. You're worried I'm getting suspicious. Well, I am. So now's your chance to explain. No more lies. Lauren opened her mouth, then closed it again. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the bubbling sauce. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and trembling. Okay, she said softly. I'll tell you everything. Derek crossed his arms, waiting. Jason is someone I knew before we met, Lauren began. We were in a relationship, but it wasn't healthy. He was controlling, and things got physical near the end. I left him and never looked back, at least I thought I hadn't. But a few months ago, I found out he was back in town. And you didn't think to tell me? Derek asked, his anger rising. I didn't want to drag you into it, Lauren said, pleading with her eyes. I thought I could handle it. Claire found out about Jason somehow and started inserting herself into the situation. She's the one who told me to keep quiet, said it was safer that way. Safer? Derek scoffed. You think lying to me made you safer? I didn't know what else to do. Lauren snapped, her voice cracking. Jason's been unpredictable, and Claire, she's been acting weird too. I don't know who to trust anymore. Derek shook his head. You could have trusted me. I'm your husband, Lauren. We're supposed to face things together. Lauren wiped her eyes, her shoulders sagging. I know. I messed up. I was scared. Jason hasn't directly threatened me, but Claire made me paranoid that he might. Derek ran a hand through his hair, pacing the kitchen. Everything was coming out now, but there were still gaps. He stopped and faced her again. Claire, he said. What's her deal? Why is she so invested in this? Lauren hesitated. I don't know. She told me she's been through something similar, but I always got the feeling there was more to it. She's obsessive. It's like she feeds off other people's drama. She's done this before. Derek muttered. Eddie found records, restraining orders, couples she's manipulated. You're not the first. Lauren's eyes widened. I knew something was off with her. God, I should have cut her off sooner. Derek nodded, finally feeling like the pieces were falling into place. Claire wasn't just a concerned neighbor, she was a master manipulator, exploiting Lauren's fear of Jason to gain control over her life. And now, Derek was caught in the crossfire. Later that night, Derek sat in his study, staring at the folder on his desk. He'd finally gotten some answers, but the situation was still far from resolved. Claire was dangerous, and he needed to confront her again, this time with all the facts in hand. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Eddie. Got more info on Claire. Turns out she's been using different names. Her real name's Claire Morgan. I'll send you the full file soon. Derek frowned. Claire had gone to great lengths to cover her tracks. Whatever her endgame was, she'd perfected the art of deception. He leaned back in his chair, exhausted but resolute. Tomorrow, he'd face Claire head-on. No more games. No more lies. The next morning, Derek was on his way to Claire's house when his phone rang. It was Lauren. "Derek, I need you to come home," she said, her voice urgent. "What's going on?" Derek asked. "It's Claire," Lauren whispered. "She showed up at the house. She's acting strange, saying things that don't make sense. I think she's losing it." Derek's heart raced. "I'm on my way. Don't let her inside." "I won't," Lauren promised. Derek hung up and floored the gas pedal. The time for talking was over. Whatever Claire had planned, it was about to come crashing down. When Derek arrived home, Claire was standing on the front lawn, her face a mask of eerie calm. Lauren stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching her warily. "Derek," Claire called out, her voice unnervingly cheerful. "We need to talk." "I think we've talked enough," Derek said, stepping between her and Lauren. "It's time for you to leave." Claire's smile faltered, and for the first time, Derek saw the cracks in her facade. Her eyes darted between him and Lauren, as if calculating her next move. "You don't understand," she said softly. "I was trying to protect her. Protect both of you. By manipulating us? By making Lauren afraid?" Derek shook his head. "No. You're done." Claire's expression hardened. "You'll regret this, Derek. You'll see." Without another word, she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the still morning air. Derek exhaled slowly, tension draining from his body. He turned to Lauren and took her hand. "It's over," he said. "She's gone." Lauren nodded, her eyes still filled with fear and uncertainty. "I hope you're right." Derek wasn't entirely sure he was. But for now, they had each other. And that was enough. The house was still buzzing with tension after Claire's departure. Derek and Lauren spent the rest of the day talking, really talking, without the lies and half-truths that had plagued them for weeks. Lauren explained everything in detail: how Jason had reappeared out of nowhere, how Claire had wormed her way into her life under the guise of friendship, and how the fear of history repeating itself had paralyzed her into silence. "I thought I could handle it alone," Lauren said quietly, her hands gripping her coffee mug. "But Claire knew exactly how to push my buttons. She made me doubt everything, even you." Derek sighed and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "She's done this before. She finds people in vulnerable situations and inserts herself into their lives. We were her latest project." Lauren shivered. "I still don't understand why. What does she get out of it?" "Control," Derek replied. "Power. Some people thrive on chaos. Maybe it makes her feel important." The conversation was interrupted by Derek's phone buzzing on the table. It was Eddie again. "Hey, I've got the full report on Claire," Eddie said. "You're not going to believe this." Derek stepped away from Lauren and moved to the living room. "Go on." "Claire Morgan isn't just a stalker or a manipulator," Eddie continued. "She was married once, to a guy named Daniel. They had a nasty divorce about 8 years ago. According to court records, she accused him of abuse, but the case was thrown out due to lack of evidence. After that, she started moving from place to place, always involving herself in other people's marriages. It's like she's on a mission to destroy relationships." Derek frowned. "She accused Daniel of abuse? Do you think she was lying?" Hard to say, Eddie replied. But either way, she's been dragging other people into her personal vendetta ever since. You were just the latest targets. Derek thanked him and hung up, his mind spinning. Claire's actions suddenly made more sense, twisted sense, but sense nonetheless. She was projecting her trauma onto others, sabotaging their lives to recreate the control she'd lost in her own. But that didn't make her any less dangerous. As night fell, Derek double-checked the locks on the doors and windows. He couldn't shake the feeling that Claire wasn't finished with them yet. Lauren sensed his unease. You really think she'll come back? Lauren asked, her voice hushed. I don't know, Derek admitted. But I'm not taking any chances. They settled into an uneasy silence as the hours passed. Derek's mind was on high alert, every creak of the house making his nerves jump. Around midnight his phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from the security cameras he'd installed. Motion detected near the backyard gate. Derek froze, adrenaline surging through his veins. He grabbed his phone and pulled up the camera feed. The grainy image showed a shadowy figure standing near the gate, just out of reach of the porch light. Claire, he whispered. Lauren came to his side, her eyes widening as she saw the footage. What is she doing? I don't know, Derek replied. But I'm going to find out. He grabbed a flashlight and headed for the back door, motioning for Lauren to stay inside. As he stepped into the cool night air, his senses sharpened. He scanned the yard, his flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. Claire, he called out. I know you're there. Come out. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, slowly, Claire stepped into the light. She looked disheveled, her eyes wild and glassy, as if she hadn't slept in days. Derek, she said softly. I just wanted to talk. You've done enough talking. Derek replied coldly. You need to leave. Now. Claire took a step closer, her hands trembling. You don't understand. I was trying to protect her. To protect both of you. By destroying our marriage? Derek demanded. By filling Lauren's head with fear? I wasn't trying to destroy anything. Claire's voice cracked with desperation. I know what it's like to be trapped. I thought I could help her see the truth before it was too late. The truth? Derek shook his head. The only truth is that you've been manipulating us from the start. Whatever happened to you in the past, it's not an excuse to ruin other people's lives. Claire flinched as if he'd slapped her. For a moment, Derek almost felt sorry for her. Almost. You're right, Claire whispered. Maybe I did take things too far. I didn't want to see someone else go through what I did. It's not your place to decide that, Derek said firmly. You need help, Claire. Real help. But it's not going to come from us. Claire stared at him for a long moment, tears glistening in her eyes. Finally, she nodded, her shoulders sagging in defeat. Okay, she said quietly. I'll go. Derek watched as she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. He waited until he was sure she was gone before heading back inside. Lauren was waiting for him by the door, her face pale. Is she gone? She asked. Yeah, Derek replied. For now. Lauren exhaled shakily and leaned into him. I just want this to be over. Me too, Derek murmured, wrapping his arms around her. We'll get through this. Together. For the first time in weeks, Derek felt a glimmer of hope. The storm that had threatened to tear them apart was finally passing. But there was still one more step to take, one final confrontation to close the chapter on Claire's influence for good. The morning air was crisp, the sun rising lazily over the suburban neighborhood. Derek stood on the porch with a steaming mug of coffee in hand. The events of the past few weeks had left him feeling raw and exhausted, but for the first time, there was a sense of calm settling over the house. Claire hadn't returned after their confrontation last night, and Derek hoped that meant she was finally out of their lives. Lauren joined him, her expression weary but lighter than it had been in days. She leaned against the porch railing, sipping her coffee in silence. For a while, they just stood there, watching the world wake up around them. You think she's really gone for good? Lauren finally asked. Derek shrugged. I hope so. But just to be safe, I reported everything to Eddie. He's going to keep an eye on things, make sure Claire doesn't pull anything else. Lauren nodded, her gaze distant. I can't believe I let her get so close to me. It's like she knew exactly how to break me down. She's good at it, Derek said. She's been doing it for years, finding people when they're vulnerable, pushing them into chaos. But it's over now. We're not going to let her control us anymore. Lauren smiled faintly and reached for his hand. Thank you for sticking by me through all of this. I know I wasn't honest with you, and I'm sorry. We both made mistakes, Derek replied, squeezing her hand gently. But we're still here. That's what matters. They stood there together, letting the peace of the morning wash over them. But Derek knew they couldn't move forward completely until they addressed one final loose end, Jason Pierce. Later that afternoon, Derek and Lauren drove across town to Jason's house. Derek hadn't told Jason he was coming, but he didn't plan on giving the man a chance to dodge them. They pulled up to the rundown property, and Derek knocked hard on the door. After a long pause, Jason answered, looking irritated. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Lauren standing beside Derek. Well, this is a surprise, Jason said, crossing his arms. Didn't expect a reunion today. We're not here to reminisce, Derek said firmly. We just want to set things straight. Lauren stepped forward, her voice steady. I came here today because I need to make sure you understand something. You don't have any power over me anymore. Whatever control you had back then, it's gone. Jason sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, I'm not proud of the past, all right? I was a different person back then. I've been trying to stay out of your life. Claire's the one who kept stirring things up. Claire's not in control anymore, Derek said, his tone sharp. If you're serious about staying out of our lives, then stay away. No more calls. No more meetings. Jason hesitated, then nodded. Fine. You won't hear from me again. I've got my own problems to deal with anyway. With that, Derek and Lauren turned and walked away, leaving Jason in the doorway. As they drove home, a sense of finality settled over them. That evening, Derek and Lauren sat together on the couch, flipping through old photo albums. They laughed softly at memories of vacations, birthdays, and quiet moments they had forgotten. It was like rediscovering the foundation of their relationship, reminding themselves of the life they had built before doubt and fear crept in. You remember that trip to the mountains? Lauren asked, pointing to a picture of them bundled in coats, laughing as snow fell around them. How could I forget? Derek chuckled. You nearly broke your leg trying to ski. Hey, it was your idea, she teased, nudging him playfully. They shared a warm moment of connection, the wounds of the past few weeks slowly beginning to heal. You know, Derek said after a pause, I think we should take a real trip. Just us. Somewhere far away from all this drama. Lauren's eyes lit up. That sounds perfect. We could use a fresh start. Exactly, Derek agreed. The conversation drifted into dreams of travel and new beginnings, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had consumed them. For the first time in weeks, Derek felt a genuine sense of hope. A few days later, Derek received a final update from Eddie. Claire had quietly left town. She'd been spotted at a bus station, boarding a long-distance route with no forwarding address. Derek doubted they would ever see her again. He didn't feel triumph, just relief. Claire was gone, and her twisted games were behind them. Life slowly returned to normal. Derek and Lauren took steps to rebuild their trust, talking openly about their fears and insecurities. It wasn't easy, but it was worth the effort. Each day, they grew stronger as a couple. One evening, as they sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Derek reflected on everything they had been through. You know, he said quietly, if there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that communication is everything. We let too many things fester in the dark. Lauren nodded. Yeah. We can't let fear or shame keep us from talking to each other. No more secrets. No more secrets. Derek echoed, raising his glass in a silent toast. The sunset bathed the world in warm hues, casting long shadows across the yard. But for Derek and Lauren, the shadows no longer held fear. They had faced the storm, survived the lies, and found their way back to each other. Together, they were ready for whatever came next.